Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Jean Levesque Community Life Center. I'm Terry Arnold, and I'm the director of the Salem Council on Aging. I welcome you all here this afternoon for this very, very exciting event. What an exciting couple of months. The upcoming week for Salem, my goodness. I know that our seniors are very concerned about issues in the community, and so the Friends of the Council on Aging have hosted this debate. So happy you're here. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to John Russel, who is on the Friends of the Council on Aging board and also the Council on Aging appointed board, and who will serve as your moderator for today.
Thanks, Terry.
John, you have to try going up with the volume just a second.
How's that? We good? I want to take a second to thank both of the candidates, Dominick Pangallo and Neil Harrington, for coming and participating in this debate. It's a week from tomorrow is election day, so let's make sure we get out there to vote. This is a senior-focused debate sponsored by the Friends of the Council on Aging, led by fearless leader Andy LaPointe. The questions have all been presented by the seniors of the city, as well as some of them were members of the Friends, and also the COA Board of Directors, who's led by Linda Koffel. Again, thank you, Linda. The Friends of the COA and the COA Board of Directors work tirelessly to make sure that the seniors in this city have a voice and a seat at the table. Salem's made up of 40-something thousand people. 25% of that are seniors. So these issues are all important to the senior population. They're also important to everybody else in the city. We just need to understand that the seniors sometimes are struggling with housing, social isolation. So this is an important debate. This election's important, and I think we all know 25% of the citizens of Salem are seniors, and the seniors vote. So this is an important debate for both candidates. Real quick, we have two timekeepers. We have Claudia Lyons from the League of Women Voters, thank you, and our own Kathy Wrigley. They're going to try to keep us on track. We're going to start with a minute opening from each. I'm going to read a question. They're going to have 2 minutes to answer, 1 minute to rebut, and then we're going to go back and forth until we run out of questions, or we run out of an hour. Hopefully they both come up at the same time. So I'm going to also ask you to hold your applause, jeers, cheers, whatever, until the end of the debate. But again, I want to thank both candidates. They're all real busy. They got a lot going on. 1 week from tomorrow, it's over. So we're going to get started right away. We flipped the coin, so Dominick gets to do his opening first. So, Dominick?
Thanks. Oh, there we go. Okay. My thanks to the Friends of the Council on Aging for organizing this event, and to everyone here at the CLC who helped make it possible. For those who don't know me, I grew up here in Salem. My dad was a wrestling coach at Salem High School. My mom was a librarian at Salt School. Today, my wife and I are raising our two girls in the same neighborhood where I grew up. They're students at Bates and at Collins. For the last decade, I served as the Chief of Staff at City Hall. I served as the chair of the Salem Retirement Board, and I'm co-chair of the AARP's age-friendly city initiative called Salem for All Ages. When this campaign began, one of the questions that I and a lot of people had was, which direction is Salem going to go in now? And I believe deeply that we need to keep moving forward, not backward. We have a good foundation here, one that many of the people in this room had a hand in making possible. We have a lot to fix, a lot of things to work on, but that's the hallmark of a great city, being willing to innovate, to keep moving forward with professionalism, responsiveness, and transparency. Salem today is a place that other places want to be like, and we should be proud of that. We value our history, but we're always looking towards the future with optimism.
Thanks, Dominick. Neil?
Is this on?
Yep.
Hello? Yes? Okay, sorry. Hi, everybody. I'm Neil Harrington. As you all know, this election is a very critical election for the city because Mayor Driscoll has left after 17 years of very strong leadership, and that vacuum needs to be filled with someone that has experience in municipal management of municipalities. And as many of you may know, I was previously the mayor of the city for 8 years, and for the past 20 years, I have been the town manager of Salisbury, which is an appointed, not an elected position. So I come to the position with several years of experience. I deal with all of the issues in Salisbury that people deal with here in Salem. Born and raised here as well as Dominick. My family's here, my kids, my grandchildren. I'm deeply committed to the city and have been for many, many years, and I believe I can pick up the leadership mantle left by the vacancy when Mayor Driscoll left and become a very strong and effective mayor for the city of Salem.
Thank you, Neil. I also want to preface these questions with letting people know the candidates did not get these questions beforehand, so they're all blind on these questions, which makes it much more interesting. First question, I believe, goes to Dominick. Dominick, what is your definition of affordable housing, and why aren't there more subsidized senior housing units in Salem when so many can't afford so-called affordable housing?
So I believe deeply is a value that every Salem resident, every senior, every family, every child deserves a roof over their head, one they can afford, a place they can live with dignity. An affordable housing is defined as if you're paying more than 30% of your income on monthly income on housing costs, mortgage, or rent, you are housing poor. And far too many people in Salem are housing poor right now. Right now, the pace of creating new units in Salem is not keeping up with the demand, and when supply doesn't meet demand, values rise and home prices go up. The average median family income in Salem went up by 8%. In the last decade, the average median home price went up by 50%. Rents nearly doubled. Fewer new housing units were created in Salem in the last decade than the average decade of the 20th century. So right now, for every 4 low-income families in Salem, there's 1 deed-restricted affordable housing unit. Those other 3 families are having to make do in a place where they're spending far too much of their take-home income on housing. So we have pressing work to do in that. The constraint on the ability to create new housing, a lot of it comes from the cost of creating housing. When it comes to subsidized public housing, particularly from the Housing Authority, there are restraints in place because of federal laws like the Faircloth Amendment that prevent housing authorities from even creating net gains in their inventory. But we need to start thinking about our housing crisis not just as a building problem, but a people problem. There are families in crisis right now, families that my kids know in Salem Public Schools who are going to have to leave Salem, not because they don't want to be here, they don't want to be in our school district. They want to be here. People who aged in place in this community who want to be able to be here. And they need access to the services that, the great programs that are offered here at the Council on Aging through our social workers here, the food security assistance that's offered through our health department, the utility assistance, the rental assistance, but there's more we can do. I created the position of the Neighborhood Stability Coordinator at City Hall to start centralizing that work so the city has more ownership in providing direct assistance, eviction diversion, rental assistance, first-time homebuyer programs, and the kind of help that can let people keep more money in their own pockets so they can afford to stay in our community.
Neil, would you like to rebut or just go into the answer?
I don't have a specific rebuttal, but I would point out that, as Dominick has mentioned, the traditional role of housing authorities has changed over the years. My great uncle Joe was the mayor of Salem just after World War II, and he created the Salem Housing Authority. And for many, many years, the Salem Housing Authority was able to build its own housing specifically for Salem seniors. And as Dominick alluded to, the federal fair housing laws have all changed now. So even if you can build housing strictly for seniors, they're open to lotteries. You cannot restrict them simply to Salem residents. So we need to be more creative in terms of how we look at housing options for our seniors. If we cannot build enough housing that's specifically dedicated just to Salem seniors, we should be looking seriously at subsidy programs for Salem seniors who are on fixed incomes and who cannot afford either a climbing rent or they can't afford to stay even in a Salem Housing Authority property that's crumbling and debilitating.
Thank you. Do you want me to read the question again for you?
On to the next question?
Do you want to, that's your answer to the question? You didn't need the rebuttal?
No, that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. All right, second question. We're going to start with candidate Harrington. The Board of the Council on Aging has been very active in advocating for increased affordable senior housing. We've been vocal in our support for the efforts of the North Shore Community Development Corporation to create affordable senior housing on Peabody Street, Federal Street, and Lafayette Street. We also support the proposed rebuild of the present Fort Lee Terrace housing project. Although the entire project is said to be affordable, the 51 subsidized units presently at Lee Fort Terrace are guaranteed for the project. As you know by law, not all of these units are occupied by seniors. Some are occupied by disabled individuals, thereby decreasing the number of units occupied by seniors. The board is recommending an increase of 10 to 15 more subsidized senior units for Fort Lee Terrace. As mayor, would you support the recommendation of the board and work with the developers to increase the number of subsidized units?
Yes, absolutely. And I am familiar with the letter that the board sent to the administration requesting that of the new units, that a certain percentage be restricted for seniors. The 51 units that are there now, it's great when they renovate the property that they're going to be allowed to return, but all of the additional units, in my opinion, should be reserved for seniors and disabled people, and none of them are. But I think that's a major problem with how the project was approved. If I were mayor, I would insist to the developer that if you're going to redevelop and expand a Salem Housing Authority property, that all of the additional units be for seniors and not simply a mix of people that will be run, again, through a lottery system. So there's no guarantee that Salem people will even get these units, never mind seniors. So I think it's critical that we expand our affordable housing for seniors, so that, as Dominick alluded to earlier, you pay no more than 30% of your income toward your cost of living there. But those are the types of problems that come up when you put the type of development that's being proposed for Lee Fort Terrace, where the administration is not insisting that those new units be set aside for seniors. If I were mayor, that's what I would do.
Thank you.
I can just respond to the question. I guess.
Okay, so 2 minutes. This is
I may not need 2 minutes, but I would certainly, and I'm familiar with the letter as well, would support efforts to increase the share of subsidized affordable housing for senior residents of Salem, not just at Fort Terrace, but throughout the community. The question alluded to some of the CDC projects, and I think those are critical. They're not a great volume of units, but they're a good step in the right direction. And, we prioritized funding some of our ARPA dollars, which is the federal COVID relief funds, to help make those projects and other projects possible. It was a fight to make the projects like the one on Federal Street possible because of the zoning restrictions that were in place in that neighborhood required a change that took almost 2 years to get through the city council. And that's part of the reason that we struggle to create housing in Salem, is that sometimes we get so hung up in fighting over things like those zoning changes when really it's an R2 neighborhood. That building, that school building, was not going to be a 2-family house. That's not the best use for that. So we have to be willing to be positive leaders for things that make sense. And I think that we do desperately need affordable housing for every resident, for seniors, for people who've lived here, for people who are new here, and as well as for families. We have, as of March, over 200 homeless students in the Salem Public Schools. That's a 43% increase over the same month last year. There are people in crisis at every age range throughout our community, and I think that we need to make sure that we are thinking thoughtfully about how we are being compassionate leaders for everybody in our community. I put the seniors in that mix, absolutely, but I put our families, our working individuals, people who are new to the workforce, and people who have grown up here, aged in place, and want to stay in the community that they love, but they can't afford to stay in Salem anymore because the housing units aren't available and the rents are going up.
Thank you, Dominick. Third question. We're going to start with Dominick on this one. The Council on Aging has 3 outreach social workers. Where mental health is such a crisis and where so many seniors face social isolation, what do you think about staffing a mental health clinician for Salem older adults at the Council on Aging?
So I'm absolutely in support of that. And I think that there's some great funding opportunities available from the federal government to kind of seed those programs. We pursued some of that funding with Community Impact Unit for mental health outreach clinicians to work with our on-house population, and we should absolutely be pursuing the same resources to provide somebody full-time here at the Council on Aging. And I think that the work the social workers do is incredible. Saw it firsthand, especially during COVID, that they were the linchpin to so much of the Salem Together outreach efforts make sure that people who were homebound during that crisis had the connection, the personal connections, were getting the grocery deliveries they needed. I would like to build on the social work program that we have here. I think that we need to make sure that we have a bilingual social worker, make sure that the people that are here are getting the professional development opportunities and trainings to stay at the top of their field. Because, you know, the mental health crisis that came about out of COVID, really, it's not going away. It's going to be with us for decades to come. And I think that we need to make sure that we're making the investments here at the CLC, in our schools, throughout our community, and having those partnerships that ensure that we have support for mental health at every age range throughout our community.
2 minutes.
So I think in general, local councils on aging need to take a very serious mental health crisis that affects people across all age groups, as has been alluded to. But more importantly than that, I think council on agings have to adapt to the serious problems that seniors are having that are not just mental health related, not just recreational and social, but a whole variety of things that council on aging need to re-examine their role. In Salisbury, well, we have a much smaller contingent of senior citizens. We have a wide panoply of programs that I'm sure some of them are replicated here. But I would take a careful look at everything that the Council on Aging does and all of the various components of its programs, and I would make sure that it receives a very high priority. One of the things that I think is critical is that the next mayor make services for seniors a high priority, and I would start by having the head of the Council on Aging report directly to the mayor. Currently, the Council on Aging director reports to the Parks and Recreation director, which I think is a mistake. I think that a person should be, in effect, a cabinet level person, and that person should report directly to the mayor, because as John alluded to, with 25% of our entire population being in the senior category, we really need to think how important a priority the services are that the Council on Aging provides. So if it were up to me, I would have the director report directly to the mayor.
Thank you, Neil. Fourth question, and we're going to start with Neil. A good number of seniors are homeowners who would prefer to age in place. Economically, they fall in that middle zone with annual incomes just a few dollars over qualifying for senior volunteer tax write-off, basically living at just below the 60% of the AMI. Additionally, there are seniors who qualify for the write-off but are no longer physically or mentally able to participate. At this time of life, when medical and other expenses are increasing, it becomes a strain to continue to pay full increasing property taxes as well as everything else. What would be your plan to help these citizens age in place, particularly related to city property taxes?
I believe strongly in tax breaks for seniors. People who have worked their entire lives have contributed their proportion, their fair proportion of taxes, both at the local level and nationally, in terms of paying for Social Security and things like that. And so when it comes to the various types of programs that are in place, we should take full advantage of them. You mentioned the Senior Tax Work-Off Program, and again, I'll allude to a program that we have in Salisbury. We have a very robust senior and veteran tax work-off program in Salisbury, in which you receive a certain amount of money off of your taxes, again, as John said, depending upon your income status. But if you do qualify and you're physically unable to do the work, in Salisbury we have a proxy program. So anybody in the community, no matter what age they are, can serve as your proxy and can do the hours of service that are required to allow you to gain that exemption. So if they don't have that here in Salem, they should have it, so that an able-bodied person can fill in for a senior who may not be able to physically do the tax write-off work but still qualify for the tax break. Have a substitute person do that work for that person so that they can qualify for the full break. Any of those types of things that are creative that we could expand upon here would be great. It's critical when you have fixed costs and you have a fixed income and your taxes continue to rise, which is largely a function of city spending. The more the city spends, the more your taxes are likely to go up. So I would take a very hard look at how much the city is spending as well, so we can keep an eye on the overall tax burden, not just for seniors, but for all people in the city. But particularly those on fixed income, you paid your share of the city has a debt and a responsibility to you to allow you to be able to remain in your home and to use the tax write-off program to its fullest possible advantage is something that I would certainly look into if I were mayor.
Sorry, I'm messing with the format. Yeah, so in the last several years, we maximized the tax work-off opportunities, increased the number of people who could participate in it. Everybody who wants to have the opportunity to do it should be able to do so. At the end of the day, a compassionate government shouldn't expect you to have to work to necessarily receive a discount if you're somebody that's struggling to be able to pay. We had an old property tax exemption program for seniors that was clearly not working. Only a few dozen people applied for it. So we created a new program in the last administration called the Senior Tax Exemption Program, or STEP, which actually tied your tax break, your property tax break as a senior, to your circuit breaker, which increases every year, which is far more generous in terms of who is eligible. So hundreds of Salem seniors would now become eligible for that property tax break. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we're still pushing, making sure people are aware that they can apply for it and try to find out whether or not they can qualify for it. It was so far reaching that we actually had to get a special act from the legislature to get it through. And we fought for that and got it done thanks to the leadership at the state level and in partnerships with the city council. And we also have to be innovative about finding other ways for people to be able to age in place in their homes. There was a lot of conversation over the last couple of years about accessory dwelling units, but really that isn't a critical tool. And the city invested our ARPA dollars. You can get a $40,000 grant to create an accessory dwelling unit in your home. And then you get a property tax break. You don't pay property taxes on that unit. And if you want to live in that unit and rent out your house, you can do that if you want to downsize your living, but still be in the home where you've lived all your life. So we're trying to find creative solutions. It's not just about asking people to come in and to do manual labor at City Hall to get a discount on their taxes, something in a place where they've lived all their life and already contributed significantly to our community.
Thank you. Fifth question starts with Dominick. In 2017, the City Council, at the request of the Council on the Aging Board of Directors, amended the ordinance confirming that the Director of the Council on Aging shall act as the head of the Council on Aging Department and take the position out from under the Director of Park and Recreation. The ordinance change was never instituted. As mayor, would you support the change in the ordinance allowing the Director of the Council on Aging to report directly to the mayor?
So I do. I'll say so. This change came about largely as one of the reforms trying to rebuild the city after the fiscal crisis when the last mayor first took office, looking for ways to consolidate departments and try to save some additional funds and to close the budget gap. It's definitely past time to reevaluate that. I would be supportive of that. I'll also say that my leadership style isn't about look, you report to this person and I don't want you calling me. I believe in distributed leadership. The idea where every department head, whether they're part of the senior staff or not, knows that the door is open in the mayor's office, that I will answer the phone, and that I will be responsive, and whether that means that there's a dotted line or a solid line is almost immaterial to me. I'm open to that ordinance change and would support it. I'd love to have that conversation with the staff here about it. But at the end of the day, I believe in a collaborative approach to leadership. And every member of the team, whether they're senior staff, department head, mid-level managers, or frontline workers, I think they need to know that they're going to have somebody that they can always talk to and call in the City Hall and the mayor's office.
Thank you, Dominick.
So I guess I sort of jumped the shark with my previous answer to this question, but I'll just reiterate, to me it's a matter of priorities. And having served as mayor before, I can tell you that even though you may have an open door policy, how you structure your staff, it sends a critical signal not only to people who work for you, but people in the community. And if the Council on Aging Director is reporting to the Parks and Recreation Director and not reporting to the mayor, that signifies something, at least in my mind it does. And so to reiterate my answer from before, I would absolutely have the Council on Aging Director report directly to the mayor, because that signifies that services for the seniors are equally as important as fire or police, or Board of Health, or any of the other major agencies, DPW, or any of the other major agencies in town. You don't want to be treated like a second-class citizen. Your director should not be treated like a second-class citizen. That person should report directly to the mayor.
Thank you. Sixth question starts with Neil Harrington. Everyone in public office is concerned about the need to create more housing. One way to do this is through the accessory dwelling units. The city council passed an ordinance allowing accessory dwelling units to be created. Since that time, very few permits for these units have been applied for. A few of the applicants may be due, the few number of applicants may be due in part to the fact that not many people know about the ADU. As mayor, how would you go about publicizing the opportunity to create more affordable housing for our citizens?
So I don't think one size fits all when it comes to accessory dwelling units. Just as no home or no neighborhood is the same in one part of the city as it is in another. I don't think it's wise to create a blanket, which we have now, a blanket across the board ADU policy that will be applicable in all neighborhoods, all under all circumstances. However, I do think a targeted ADU program, depending upon the neighborhood and depending upon the various dimensional requirements, zoning requirements in those neighborhoods, is something that should be promoted and expanded and publicized a little bit more. I think the reason why a number of people have chosen not to do it for a variety of reasons. One, it's new. Number two, they may not think it's appropriate for their particular home or their particular circumstance. And three, I think people are concerned about the character of their neighborhoods. And, back in the day, accessory dwelling units meant that a mother or a father might age in place in a smaller unit that was attached to your home. Now you're talking about having literally perfect strangers rent from you in an ADU that's attached to your home. And I think a lot of people are leery about that, at least now at the beginning of the program. Over time, that may change, but renting to people that you don't know and putting an addition on your home, in all cases, may not be appropriate. So I think there's probably some hesitancy about that as the program starts. Again, I don't think one size fits all. In certain neighborhoods and under certain circumstances, it's appropriate, and people who feel comfortable doing that should have the ability to do that, and we should publicize the program more. I agree with that, but I'm not sure an across-the-board solution to almost anything, whether it's this or other programs having to do with affordable housing, is the right solution. Every neighborhood in this city is unique and different, and every city is different from every other city. So what's appropriate for you in your home is something that you should decide, and I just don't think a blanket policy is the way to go.
Dominick Pangallo?
Thanks. Yeah, so our accessory dwelling unit ordinance in Salem was developed over many months and many public meetings of input that a lot of people came to and helped to shape and craft what we have today. I think that we haven't been overrun by them, but we also haven't had, I think, the overwhelming number of applications for ADUs that we would hope for as a solution, one of the solutions to the housing supply challenges that we're facing. So how do we promote it better? I think there's partnerships to be had. The North Shore Association of Realtors is certainly a partner in terms of people who are looking to buy and the opportunity to create an additional revenue stream in their home, but also our partnerships within the city. Here at the CLC, like connecting with seniors who are struggling to make ends meet, to let them know you can get a almost 100% paid for dwelling unit added to your home, where you'd be able to live or rent, generate income, and also get the property taxes abated on that if you're renting it at an affordable rate. So connecting with people who may be in crisis and afraid that they have to leave their neighborhood. Through the CLC, through the collector's office, when we understand that somebody's having difficulty paying their taxes or making ends meet, letting them know that they have this option. The ARPA funds that are paying for the grant program that we put towards this, they're time limited. They're going to end in 2025. So there's a pressing need to make sure people are aware that this is a tool available to them. And even if they hadn't considered it, it's something to think about because it gives them an opportunity to generate income off their home, especially if they're living on a fixed income, or it gives them the opportunity to downsize to a smaller space within their home and still live in the home where they've lived all their life. So I'm supportive of the ADU concept, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities to amplify how we're making people aware of this opportunity.
Thank you. Again, we're going to start with Dominick. Everyone is concerned with the housing shortage, but there seems to be a growing number of bed and breakfast, Airbnbs. Do they need to be licensed? And what if they're in residential neighborhoods?
So Salem does have a fairly aggressive short-term rental ordinance that I was proud to be part of the team that we helped develop and get adopted through the city council. I think that the city needs to do more to start enforcing it. The ordinance is strong. It prohibits non-owner occupied short-term rentals. It prohibits the use of accessory dwelling units for short-term rentals. It prohibits them in certain residential zones. But if we're not enforcing that ordinance, no matter how well thought out it was and how much public input it incorporated, we're going to struggle. And it puts our existing brick and mortar bed and breakfasts and hotels at a disadvantage. And also creates a condition where you're not sure who's in the building next to you. So we have a strong ordinance that I would want us to implement. I think the key to enforcing that is starting last year, the state started collecting the room excise tax on short-term rentals. So if you rent an Airbnb, in Massachusetts, you're actually paying the room excise. So Salem's getting a small amount of that money, but it means that the Department of Revenue in Boston has a list of all the short-term rental units in Salem right now. And that's just started in the last several months. So I think we need to work with DOR, get that list, and make sure Inspectional Services has it. And they're reaching out to let those property owners know this is a violation of zoning, or you don't have a certificate of fitness. And when we start implementing that, I think that we can start making sure that we're putting some guardrails around this growing industry. Short-term rentals provide an important relief outlet for our rooming needs during busier visitor seasons here, but it has to be done within regulations and within reason. And that was the purpose of the ordinance. I'd like us to work on enforcing that ordinance now and making sure that the inspection services team have the tools to do that, staff to do that, and the information to know where these properties are so that we can make sure we're protecting our community and enforcing the ordinances that we work so hard to create.
Thank you. Neil?
So I agree that we have a good ordinance with regard to short-term rentals, and I also agree that we don't do a good job enforcing it. In Salisbury, there are a lot of rental properties, particularly at the beach. And when the state put the short-term rental tax program into place, they put no enforcement mechanism in place with it. So it leaves the local community, leaves it up to the local communities to decide how and under what circumstances they're going to enforce this so that people who take advantage of it, even legally, can pay their fair share of taxes. In Salisbury, we know every single rental property in Salisbury, and since that program started with the short-term rental tax, we have every year for the last 2 or 3 years sent a notice to the owner of every single rental property telling them they are not going to be able to renew their certificate of occupancy for their rental unit unless they can prove that they have a certificate from the Department of Revenue that says that they are paying their short-term rental tax. We have fined several rental property owners in Salisbury who just look the other way because the Department of Revenue does not enforce the state law. They leave it up to the local communities to do that. And I'm particularly concerned in Salem during the haunted happenings. There are large numbers of people in Salem who go undetected, who rent their properties out because they don't want to deal with the hassle of all the traffic and the people coming into town during haunted happenings. And so they leave for a month. And what do? They rent their properties out as Airbnbs, in some cases illegally. And they're making a very large sum of money and not even paying the tax. At the very least, they should pay the tax, never mind the enforcement about the fact that they're renting them out illegally to Airbnbs. So I have a lot of experience in this area, and I agree that we need much stricter enforcement. Apparently, we're not enforcing it. We should enforce it to the fullest extent.
Thank you. Next question. We'll start with Neil again. If elected, what would you do about managing haunted happenings?
I would start by recognizing and expressing the fact that it needs to be managed. And unfortunately, that has not happened in recent years. No one in this room or in this community wants Salem to shrivel up and be unwelcome to tourists and be an unwelcoming place for people in the fall. Haunted Happenings is a wonderful event. It's great to see people dress up and have all the kids have fun at the parade. And have a lot of people visit here from out of town and spend money locally. But the lack of management, particularly emanating from the mayor's office and other enforcement agencies, except for the public safety people who do a great job, is glaring. And throwing up your hands and saying, well, people are going to come anyway, what are you going to do about it, is not the answer and cannot continue to be the answer. It needs management and it needs to start from the mayor's office. Most of the marketing and promotion of haunted happenings is not done by the city. Destination Salem, which is our promotion and marketing arm, only spends 5% of its dollars on marketing haunted happenings. So who markets our city for haunted happenings? Tour bus companies, out of town walking tour people, and the people that own them who live out of state. Other people are defining what we are all about and why people should come here in large numbers to visit us. And that is not something, as a city, I don't think that we should tolerate. We should welcome visitors, we should let them have fun, we should have all kinds of events that we have during haunted happenings. But it starts with management, and management starts in the mayor's office, and it's been a glaring lack of management as far as I'm concerned. The other thing, I'll just make one other comment, is that the Salem Common is a great historical resource, and we're allowing it to be trampled during haunted happenings. If I were mayor, I would not allow any events related to haunted happenings on the Common.
Thank you.
Thanks. Salem's a vibrant, happening place. It's one of the reasons that, I moved away for a couple of years from my wife's work. We decided to come back and wanted to be in a place that other people want to visit, and I think that's better than the alternative. But it means we have a responsibility to manage it. We can't go back to the bad practices of the past where we just pretended people weren't coming, put our head in the sand. It resulted in property destruction, it resulted in violence. And a lot of the operations that we put in place around October now are related directly to public safety management. I want to say, the management that's been going on by the hardworking teams that work for our city, police and fire, absolutely, public safety is critical, but also our DPW workers, people like Alan Tokowski, our Parks and Recreation team, inspectional services, they're working hard. But haunted happenings has changed, and we need to start changing how we're managing it, because October is a busy time of year. We need to amplify our communications to let people know they need to plan their trips in advance. Don't drive. We need to push the T to add more trains throughout the month, not just on Halloween, which is what they do right now. It's not helpful. Improve how we manage traffic and parking with actual solutions. Things like parking capacity wayfinding signage, expanding the October shuttle program, and creating more opportunities for people to get to parking without having to drive into our downtown. Proactively planning to close roads. So instead of waiting until they get really crowded and saying, close the road, if we have a schedule when we close roads, residents know when they can plan their travel and how to get around accordingly. And the city can control those closed roads in a way that allows us to program the spaces so we can curate the public performances better. And lastly, we have to be better about identifying ways to start exporting the cost of managing all this onto the visitors themselves. The city brings in money in October, and our businesses do as well, but the city brings in money through parking and license fees. But the amount we spend is starting to get closer to that amount that we bring in. And once that happens, we're asking the taxpayers to subsidize October, which I don't think we can allow to happen. I think we need to start finding ways, whether it's parking costs, working with our walking tour companies, but finding ways to export the costs for these impacts onto the people that are creating those impacts and not the Salem taxpayers.
Thank you. Dominic? This is a good one. The change to North Street has created an obstacle course. I believe this is a more dangerous situation and will increase traffic on the side streets. What are your thoughts, and what your plans for North Street?
Sure. So as a resident of one of those side streets, I can tell you anecdotally that I had experienced increased traffic, and I think that the data probably supports that as well. There are definitely improvements to be made on North Street. I think the biggest challenge, just from personal experience, somebody who drives on that road daily, multiple times. My 12-year-old rides her bike on North Street, wouldn't let her do that before the bike lanes were safely protected. My 9-year-old walks to Bates School, wouldn't let her do that before there was daylighting at the crosswalks. I think the road is a little less convenient now, but that is not because so much of the bike lanes, which are new, but the traffic signals, which have always been problematic. I think the parking stall dimensions need to be reevaluated. So you park on North Street, your door might open into traffic, so I think those need to be adjusted. But putting those two signals in Mason Street on School Street onto the city's smart traffic signal system, so they are actually communicating with the other traffic signals in the city, can tune the traffic, move it through more efficiently. At the end of the day, I think that the city has a responsibility that if somebody's using the road in a manner that's legal, we have to make sure that they're able to do so in a way that's safe. We've seen the number of crashes on North Street go down. It's probably less convenient, but the data doesn't support that it's less safe. But we have to be willing to always keep an open mind about making improvements to our traffic safety, to every program. Look at the data after something's been done, look at the feedback after something's been done, and make adjustments. This initiative went through 8 public meetings to solicit public input. And I think that there's more public input to be had, so I'd absolutely be open to making positive changes on North Street, but not in a way that would put anybody, including my own child who bikes on that street, at risk.
Thank you. Neil?
So this is a controversial topic, and you'll notice that my opponent used the word data about 5 times in his answer. I'm less interested in data than I am in people. The people who have to travel on North Street, the people who have to live in North Salem and cannot get out of their side streets, and the business people that are dying on the vine because this project took 72 parking spots off of North Street. I have an interesting proposition. Everybody who thinks the North Street traffic changes are really working well, please raise your hand. Really, really well. Everyone who thinks they are not working well, raise your hand. Does that tell you something? A little bit of common sense and a little less data from behind a computer will inform people that this type of what my opponent calls data-driven planning is not something that's compatible with what works for people who have to actually live through the reality and the inconveniences of what North Street has become. And not only that, the administration that put this in place is planning to do the same thing on Loring Avenue, from the college to Marblehead, on Boston Street, and other streets in the city of Salem. And again, with all due respect to my opponent, he talked about 8 public meetings. Those public meetings were held completely remotely, where none of the residents were able to stand in the room with the people that planned this and voice their opinions. We should go back to public meetings where there's a quorum of every public board and you can physically go to the meeting and see what is being planned instead of being muted on a computer someplace. We need to return to public participation in the processes such as traffic calming changes. And I support the principle of traffic calming changes. But this plan is a disaster, and the idea that you might extend it to other communities in the city and have these phony public meetings that are completely remote where people cannot participate is not what government is all about, in my opinion.
Thank you. For Neil, residential taxes had a major increase this past year. Do you have any plans to curb future increases? If so, please enlighten us.
Competition? Someone's phone is on, I think. Taxation is a function of spending, plain and simple. The more the city spends, if it's not able to keep its growth consistent with the amount of spending, and if you add all those things together and you continue to spend on programs, people's taxes will go up. There needs to be a re-examination of the city's budget in terms of how much money we spend and what we spend it on. It's very, very important that the new mayor have a fresh look at what the city spends money on. Salem is a complex city to manage, and it takes someone, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that has the leadership skills and the direct hands-on municipal management decision to make hardline choices about what to spend money on and what not to spend money on. But it seems recently, in recent years, that the city has glommed onto what I would call every new bright, shiny object, and that is every new program that comes down the pike where the state or the federal government dangles some sort of grant money that requires a city match of money. They seem to glom onto it. That spending of that city money adds up. And when that city money adds up, your taxes go up. So it's very, very important that the next mayor have a critical eye to how your tax dollar is spent, and that you elect someone who knows how to look at a municipal budget and knows how to manage a municipal budget so that taxes are reasonable. We are not going to be blind, and I'm not going to be blind and suggest to people that if I'm elected, your taxes will go down, because eventually over time, taxes do go up. That is a reality. And I would be kidding you if I said otherwise. But the rate at which they go up is strictly a function of spending. So the next mayor needs to be fiscally responsible and needs to have the experience to know what needs to be cut out and what can be continued.
Thank you. Dominic?
Yeah, no one likes to pay taxes. We enjoy what they make possible. Clean streets and parks and buildings like this and the people that work in them. I'm proud of the record of professional financial management of the last administration, and I'm committed to bring that same kind of professional approach to the city going forward. In the last administration, we had 17 years of balanced budgets and financial reports filed timely and transparently as required by law and publicly on the city's website for people to inspect. Received stamps of approval from the Government Finance Officers Association as nationwide fiscal watchdog. We built up record rainy day funds and a record bond rating, the best in the city's history, and we did that without a single Prop 2.5 tax override. That kind of financial track record and practices, best practices, it's not a given. In 2006, when the last mayor took office, she inherited a fiscal mess left over from the bad practices of past administrations. That took a lot of hard work from people to dig us out of that hole. The average single-family tax bill in Salem over the last 17 years increased by about 3% each year. In the 17 years prior to that, over the previous administrations, it was double that increase, almost 6%. We stabilize our taxes by being fiscally prudent. That's what we've done with the Salem Retirement Board, which I chair. It's a $250 million system that thousands of our retirees rely on here, and it's received an over 8% return during my leadership. And we do it by supporting reasonable growth that grows our tax base. And we do it by being aggressive about identifying grant opportunities, not every single one that comes along, but the ones that are aligned to opportunities that we've already identified. If something's in our budget or our capital plan, if it's a critical need for our infrastructure, for our water, our sewer, our public buildings, or schools, and we're able to secure federal or state dollars for it, it's irresponsible not to do that. That's a recipe for the fiscal success that we've had in Salem so far, and that's the kind of commitment that I would continue to bring to City Hall.
Thank you. Dominic, again, we all know that traffic is a major issue in the city of Salem. Now, we know it's not just Salem, but Salem just seems to have its share of congestion. Are there any thoughts on what we might be able to do to help the traffic flow better through the city?
So I think there's a couple of options on the table. I mentioned the Smart Traffic Signal program, and this is a system that uses traffic signals that actually communicate to each other. We've started implementing that over several years, and I think it needs to be completed because when that system's in place, it's really a fantastic way to use technology to push through traffic and move more efficiently. I think we also need to identify where the traffic's coming from and how we can displace it in ways that allow people to get to or through Salem without needing to use a car. Everybody, not everybody's going to be able to not have a car. A lot of people rely on it to get around, especially depending on where they live. A lot of people need it for their jobs. But if you're somebody that's commuting into Salem because you work at Salem Hospital, we want you to have the South Salem train station so you can take the train and get off and walk up the driveway to get to work and not have to come in on Route 107. We brought in the Salem Ferry. I think we need to expand our water transportation options so the more commuters we take off of North Street and Bridge Street, Boston Street, and Highland Avenue and Mooring Avenue and are able to put them on trains and ferries, the less traffic congestion we have. And the last thing is I think we need to think thoughtfully about our development patterns in Salem. 17,000 people a day commute into Salem to work. Some of them drive, some of them take the train. And not all of them want to live here. But if those who did want to live here could find a place they could afford near where they worked, the courts, the hospital, the university, any of those major employers, if they could find a place and they were willing to live there, they wouldn't be on our major corridors driving in every day to work. They would be walking to work, they would be driving a shorter distance, they'd be using a blue bike, they'd be using a Salem skipper. I think those are the opportunities that we need to identify and keep an open mind about, because it seems counterintuitive to say when you create housing, you can reduce traffic. But if you create the right housing in the right places, you can alleviate a lot of that commuter traffic that's coming in.
Thank you. Neil?
My opponent alluded to something called smart traffic signaling. I don't know who came up with that term or who's designed those types of things. They don't seem too smart to me, quite frankly. If you ever stood at or driven a car and had to stop at an intersection where the automatic pedestrian signal came on, even though there are no pedestrians crossing the street, happens to me all the time. Have you ever come up to an intersection where there is a no right turn on red sign at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, where there are no other cars on the road whatsoever, and you have to sit there and you can't take a right turn on red? There was a proposal introduced by one of the city councilors just recently to eliminate all right turns on red in the city of Salem. Any traffic expert, and I've talked to several of them, real traffic experts, not geeks who sit behind a desk with a computer and design these things, real traffic experts will tell you eliminating right turn on red is a ridiculous proposal. So I'm completely opposed to doing that, and I think we should take a very hard look at some of this so-called smart traffic signaling You can walk across a pedestrian can walk across a street, depending upon the width of the street, in a limited amount of time. Even if you're impaired or handicapped, the amount of time that these signals give you is 2 or 3 times the amount of time. What does that do? It holds up traffic, and traffic backs up on all the major roadways in town because these so-called smart signaling things are making the traffic situation worse than it is. A little more common sense and a little more listening to actually the experts who know something about this, such as the police traffic division, which seems to get ignored regularly by the parking and traffic office of our city, would go a long way, at least around the edges, to solving some of the major traffic problems that we have in the city. Dominick is right, there are 17,000 people a day who travel here to work. Why are we making it more difficult for them to come here?
Thank you. Neil, thoughts on term limits?
For mayor?
Mayor, in this particular case, yes.
That's an interesting question. When I was younger and a lot more idealistic, philosophically, I was opposed to the concept of term limits. And I guess I would say, in all honesty, I still am now. But I do believe that turnover is a good thing after a certain period of time. Not necessarily a mandated turnover that you would get with term limits, but people getting more involved in the process and people making their voices heard. The gridlock in Congress, for example, is a direct result of the same people being in there for 30 and 40 years and the electorate continuing to put them there. So while I not necessarily haven't made that leap to the point where I think that term limits need to be statutorily mandated, I do think that turnover is good and that after a certain period of time, you should get off the stage and let somebody else have a chance. Again, philosophically, I'm not ready to make the leap to suggest that we should change the law, but voter participation is abysmal these days. In our preliminary election, it was 22%. In the last mayoral election, it was 43%. When I ran for mayor several years ago, it was 72% of the people voting. And now we're down to less than 50%. You get the government you deserve. And whether it's term limits or more active participation, I think turnover is good.
Thank you. Dominick?
So specifically, speaking to the idea of a term limit for mayor, I'm not supportive of the concept. I think it arbitrarily deprives the voters of a choice that they would otherwise have. In Salem, I think we're fortunate that the voters here have they've been asked to weigh in on incumbent mayors in the past, and for 50 years, before Mayor Driscoll decided to leave office, it was an incumbent who was defeated, including my opponent. And I think that the voters of Salem have the ability to weigh the options that are before them and make the judgment if somebody needs to go or if they're entitled to be able to stay and continue with their vision. So I wouldn't be supportive of the concept of term limits for mayor. As far as other offices, I think it's worth exploring, but I think that as far as the mayor is concerned, the people of Salem have demonstrated their ability to make judgments about their incumbents, and they have, at least in recent history, decided when it was time for someone to go and when it was time to keep somebody on board.
Thank you. One last question, starting with Dominick. What makes you a stronger candidate than your challenger?
This is kind of getting into a little bit what I was going to touch on my closing statement, but I'll say, I really do believe that we're facing some critical issues in Salem that require leadership that is ready to go on day one. Somebody that's been part of the work that's been going on here. We didn't have an opportunity to talk. We talked about housing. We didn't have an opportunity to talk about the offshore wind project, just as an example. This is a project that I've had the opportunity to work on for the last 2 years, both with city staff and with Crowley and CEC and with Avangrid potentially if the rebid goes. And that's something that is facing some critical path deadlines in the very immediate future. We don't have time for someone to get up to speed on them. I think that we need a leader who's been part of that work every day, full time, and who's ready to step into the role. And also someone who shares that optimistic, forward-looking vision of our city. I'm proud to be a Salem public school parent. And I know that schools are not a topic that we're going to cover here very much, but I think it's really important because the future of our community and the reputation of our schools is directly tied. So I think that being somebody that's looking towards the future of our city and that's been part of the work here, that has been part of the work that built the foundation of our community alongside so many of the folks in this room, who's ready to keep us moving forward. Makes me a candidate who's qualified, because it's not just about your ability to file paperwork or to know how to manage an office. This job requires somebody who's ready to lead with skill and competence, but also with compassion and an eye towards the future.
Thank you. Neil?
So the single two most important ingredients, in my opinion, that a mayor needs to possess is, leadership and actual hands-on municipal management experience. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I have 8 years as a mayor. I have 20 years as a town manager. My opponent has never even run for elective office before. So to suggest that he's ready to take on the awesome responsibility of managing a city as complex as Salem, I guess I would have to respectfully disagree with that. Secondly, I'm running on my own record, which is a public record, things I accomplished here in Salem with a great team of dedicated professionals, things I've been able to accomplish in Salisbury. I'm running on my own record. I'm not running on someone else's record. I'm not running on the record of an elected official who's not here anymore and provided the direction and made all of the hard decisions over the last 17 years. I'm running on something I have actually accomplished and I have been accountable for. I have been accountable for the last 28 years to the citizens of both the communities that I've served, both in Salem and in Salisbury. The gentleman to my right has been accountable to one person, the former mayor. That's it. He's never been accountable to an entire population of people. I have several years of experience understanding when people are upset, understanding when people are excluded from the process, and understanding when people are concerned about the quality of their life in their neighborhoods and things that affect their everyday life, and they don't feel that their voices are being heard. So I have the experience, I've done it before, and as I said at the beginning, I love the city. I've given a considerable amount of my professional time. My entire life has been here. My family's entire life has been here. My family's been here 150 years. We're deeply committed to Salem. And if there's any difference between myself and my opponent, it's the differences that I highlighted just a couple of minutes ago in terms of someone who's actually done the job as opposed to someone else who's worked for someone else who has done the job. So I would respectfully ask you to consider those facts when you come to vote on May 16th.
Well, we had set up for a 1-minute closing, but you may have used that. If you'd like to take a minute now for a closing, if you feel like you covered it in that last question.
I'd just like to thank everybody. This is the largest crowd. This is even bigger than the debate crowd that we had a week and a half ago. So give yourselves a hand.
Yeah, if you don't mind it, but just
Yep.
because I think I want to respond to something there. And I want to say thank you, John, to the Council on Aging, the Friends of the Council on Aging, and the CLC staff who helped make this possible. Now, I do think that Salem needs a mayor who's ready to lead on the challenges that are facing us today, not 30 years ago. I've not run for office here before, and the idea that you have to be a politician to manage our city is frankly what's wrong with politics right now. Not an itinerant politician, somebody who's deeply invested in our community and who's been present and engaged in the work alongside many of you for these last few decades. Someone who's been there for Salem, shoulder to shoulder, in the trenches, helping make the important decisions and engage in the important work. Someone who's ready to get to work for our city on day one. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I invite you to join our campaign. My website is pangalloforsalem.com, and I'd just like to humbly ask for your vote on May 16th. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to close by saying this is an amazing turnout. Shows that the seniors of the city are engaged in the process. Let's face it, we're either a senior, know a senior, or hope to someday be a senior. So all these questions are important. I want to thank both candidates for coming today. Gets a little chippy at times, but both have been running a very positive campaign, working on their own issues. So I think it's important. I hope that these questions and answers have given you some clarity and maybe some direction in which way you want to go. Again, I want to thank both the candidates, I want to thank the staff here, and I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.